Welcome back to this Python tutorial series. This tutorial is brought to you by EdNight, so like, subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Today we are going to be talking about loops. We are going to see what loops are in Python and in programming in general, what they are used for. So first, let's explain what loops are. Just like the literal meaning of loop, meaning to repeat something in an order or a sequence. That is what loops actually mean in programming too, just repeating a particular action multiple times. And this is something that computer does better than we. Loops just allow us to repeat a particular action multiple times, just like I have said. So in Python, we have two main type of loops, which is the while loop and the for loop. So as I said earlier, that loops just help us to repeat an action or a particular code. So we are going to see how we can use a while loop and a for loop. So first up, let's talk about the while loop. The while loop, to start or to use a while loop, you will need to use the while keyword. So what the while loop actually does is that it repeats a particular instruction till a particular condition is met or a particular condition is seen as false. The while loop takes a condition and check for that condition each time it runs the code or it runs the action it is asked to run. So we are going to see the while loop in action. So to use the while loop, just like I have said, we need the while keyword. So now the next thing is to actually give a condition to this loop, meaning if this condition is true, I want you to perform this particular action, just like the if statement. So we are going to say if condition is equal to true, first up, let's define condition. We'll set it to true. So we add our colon. Then remember the indentation, very important. Then we actually want it to perform an action. Maybe I want it to print condition is true. So let's save it and run it. So notice what is happening. It keeps running the code, keep repeating. As long as condition is true, it keeps repeating. Now notice something, this condition added actually have no way of changing. Condition is equal to true, and as long as condition is equal to true, it will keep repeating this line. It will keep repeating this print statement right here as long as this condition is true. So that is practically how an if state how a while loop works. A while loop without a stopping condition or condition that cannot be met is usually seen as an infinite loop, just like this one, because the loop will never end. It will run for infinity. As long as we do not cut the program, it will run for infinity. So this is called an infinite loop because of this condition will always be true. So for instance, that I actually change this to false. notice something, nothing is printed because this condition is not true. This condition is equal to false. So let me change it back to true. But now I don't want this this loop to run forever. I don't want it to be an infinite loop. I actually want to change the value once this this while loop works. Once it runs, I want the value of condition to actually change, because that is the only way we can actually stop the loop, because the loop will keep running as long as condition is true. So we need a way to actually tell our loop we want condition to be false when we are satisfied. So I can just come in here and assign condition to a new value, which is false. Now let's print this. Let's save this and run it. Notice the loop only run this action once. Here is what is happening. Now our interpreter checks for this condition and it sees that this condition is true. Then it performs the action here. It takes the action line by line. It goes from this first action. Then after this first action, it goes to the next one. And the next action changed the value of condition to be false. Now the new value of condition is false. Going back to this condition again, now the value of condition is false, making this statement here to be, or this this statement here or this expression to be false rather than true. So this is how the while loop works. Just keep going in this circular form, repeating and repeating till the condition is actually false, till whatever condition here is actually false. So right now we're just printing condition is true. Let's actually use while loop for something that can be used. So let's clean this. So I want to write a loop to actually count from a particular number to another number. So I will make a variable called count. Maybe I'll set it to a 1, or rather to a 0. So I'll use my while, and the condition to this while loop will be as long as count is less than 10, I want it to print count. So let's see what we actually have. Okay, there's a mistake. Sorry. So notice the number keeps just keep repeating and repeating. We are still in an infinite loop, but that's not what we are looking for, right? We actually want this number to count from 1 to 10. Now we need a way to actually change the value of count, because count will continue to be 0 if we do not change it. So we are going to add what is called an incrementation. We will now increment count. Each time this action is run, we will increment count a plus minus by 1. We will increment count by 1 each time we run this loop. We will increment count by 1. So let's run the loop now. So notice we go from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Why we do not have 10 here is that computers start counting from 0 and we actually asked it to start counting from 0. So we see how it actually works. First we use our while, then we set a condition. Then any action that is under this while loop keeps repeating till this condition is actually met. So that is actually what a while loop is all about. So this is how we make a while loop. Remember, if you do not change the value, if you do not change the value of whatever it is that is your condition, or you need to remember you need to change the value of whatever you are using as a condition or as an iteration variable. You actually need to change the variable. Like before that, we will use condition where we are checking if condition was equal to true. So in order for us to actually stop that loop, we actually needed to change the value of condition to be equals to false. So to avoid running into an infinite loop, you have to make sure that whatever variable or whatever value you are using to iterate is actually incrementing or actually changing. So having talked about while loop, so we will jump over to for loops. We will see what for loops are in Python. So like the while loop, the for loop is also used to repeat a particular instruction or action. But the special thing about for loop is that for loop actually has a predetermined amount of time and actually a predetermined of what to actually loop over. Mostly we use it in looping over lists or a collection, because a for loop actually takes like everything is going to loop over. Like it does not just count from 1 to 100. It actually has a defined amount of item to loop over. It doesn't just keep looping till a particular condition is false, a particular condition is actually false or something like that. It has an amount of item is going to loop over. As I said, it is mostly used for looping over lists or some kind of collections. So we are going to see the while loop in action. So for now, we can comment these blocks, we can comment this code. So now to make or to use the for loop, we need to use the for keyword. So now we need to get like an iteration variable. This variable is going to save whatever we are iterating upon. Just like in a while loop, we had a count to actually be our iteration variable. So now let's say we have item as our iteration variable. So now we'll use the in keyword, because we want this for loop to loop over every item in a particular list or a particular collection. So we'll have to make a list. So let me just make a variable my list. So let's define my list. My list will be equal to a list. So this list will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So what do we actually want? We want this to print items. So let's see what we have. Let's save this and run it. So notice it's looping over this list, every item in this list. Now it is assigning every item to this item variable. I don't know if you understand what is actually happening. It is looping over this list, and each item is being identified or referred to as item. So I can change this to anything, maybe I. It is just an iteration variable. I can name it anything. See, it still works. As I said, that the for loop is mostly used to loop over a collection. So we mostly use it, we remember our collection data types like dictionary, tuple, list, etc. We mostly use for loop when we want to loop over things like that, maybe a string, etc. So let's try making count, just like as we use the for loop to count from 1 to 0. Why don't we try counting from 1 to 1000? So I won't come and start making a list of 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 till 1000. I'll use what is called I'll use the range keyword. So the range, I will count from 0 to 1000. So let's see what we have. So yep, so you can see we have this range counting from 0 to 1000. This is one thing I told you that computer is actually good at. Imagine asking a human being to count from 0 to 1000, how long it will take. But our system just counted from 0 to 1000 in how many seconds? Not even up to 1 second. And one thing about for loop is actually faster than a while loop, but we're not going to get into that right now, so I won't confuse you because you are still at a beginner's level. So but a for loop is essentially like, I use for loop for almost everything, but mostly where we actually use for loop is actually when we actually want to loop over a collection. That is where a for loop has power over a while loop, because a while loop actually to actually loop over a collection, it's not that basic as how a for loop actually makes it. So let's move over to the next thing. So we cannot talk about loops without talking about break and continue. So these two reserved words work with loops. The continue stops the loop to maybe to print a particular line or to execute a particular code, then continue with the iteration. But the break actually ends the whole loop. So let's see the break and the continue in action. So we are going to write an if statement. We are going to check if I, because I is the iteration variable, is equal to 10. So if I is equal to 10, I want it to break. I want it to break the loop. Notice my indentation. The for loop, I have my indentation showing that this line of code is under the for loop. Then when I give my if statement, I have another indentation showing that this break is actually under this if statement. So let's save and run it. You can see it actually counts to 10. even though I specifically or I literally told it to actually count from 0 to 100. Once it gets to 10, this loop actually breaks. So let's see the continuer in action. As I said, the continuer stops the loop to actually execute a particular, maybe a particular action, to do a particular action, then continue with the loop. So I can say once we get to 10, I want to print hello, then continue. So let's go up, let's look for 10. Oh, 10 is actually up. So let me kind of expand the screen so we can see better. So let's keep going up, let's keep scrolling and scrolling. So we have 10. Once we got to 10, we actually printed hello, and we continued our iteration. So this is practically how the continuer works. Once we get to 10, we want to break from the loop, just stop the loop, then continue. So we are done with loops. We have learned how we can repeat actions using for loop and while loop. So in case you have any question on how to use a for loop or how to use a while loop, or you have question on the break and on the continue, you can ask in the comment section. Remember, the break and continue works on both while loop and a for loop. They work on both. You can use the break and continue on a while loop, you can use it on a for loop, just like the way I use it here. Mostly the best use case is actually to set a condition, then if that condition is met, then you break out of that loop, something like that. So thanks for watching. If this video was useful to you, please like, subscribe and give us a thumbs up.